with the hidden palace now behind us, we can finally make our way to the seventh and final palace, known as the Great Palace. Before doing so though, we need to go to the last town in the game as well. And this is the old town of Kasuto, or just Kasuto. And from the hidden palace, it's just to the west. We have to cross this little bridge here. There's a bunch of these Bagos, and there's also a Zora on the bridge. Get by him and enter the town. Now that we have the cross, we can actually see these Moa floating. Before, when we didn't have the cross, these would actually float around, but they'd be invisible. So, Kasuto, strange, it is deserted. All the citizens migrated to the new town of Kasuto. You can enter just the first building. Once you enter the first building, just head down the steps, go over and speak to the old wise man. And I guess he wasn't scared, he stayed in town. I can give you most powerful magic. And this is the Thunder Spell. And the Thunder Spell doesn't really have much of a use other than it is needed to defeat one of the final bosses known as Thunderbird. We are going to use that later on in this chapter when we fight him. There is nothing else to do in this town, so leave the town and we need to head right across the bridge. What you could do in these scenes, you could actually just turn into a fairy if you really want to, and just float across the top of the screen, since the fairy spell doesn't use as much of magic as it did when we first got it. Or you can just move along. I actually find these scenes, while they look simple, they can be rather difficult because the Bagos just keep coming and you might get knocked into the water, and that's an automatic loss of a life. We have to cross another bridge, and this is completely identical to the one we just crossed. So there's more Bagos, there's also another Zora. So just like I just said, you could use the fairy spell if you want to. You could have actually gone the long way around this area, but it would have avoided the bridge, but you would have probably fell into a lot of side scenes with other enemies. Either way, this shouldn't be too difficult for you. At least not as difficult as what is to come. We are now going to be making our way through this little graveyard area, and now there are more Moas floating around. There's a ton of them too, and what stinks about these guys is if they hit you, they'll take your life away, plus they'll take some experience points. Just head south, and here is a fixed location here, like you can't avoid this scene. And there's the red Lizalfos tossing rocks at you, just like we saw earlier in the scene. But there's also the blue Moa floating around. And this is again one of those Moas we couldn't see before, but now that we have the cross we can see him. It could be rather difficult, but just run right by. And then move to the right and go into this little scene over here, and you'll find a red magic jar. Be sure to fill up your life as much as you can, and then get the magic jar. So luckily, I had full magic and full health. Now we want to just travel west, and this area is known as the Valley of Death, and this is the lead up to the Great Palace. And some fans argue that this is actually harder than the Great Palace itself. This first scene here has a bunch of Moa. There's also a Gairuboku. You could use the spell and it will get rid of the Gairuboku and Moa if they're on the screen. So that's something to keep in mind. In this area here, there is a Lizalfos, and it's a very narrow area, so you have to defeat it. Use your shield spell if you'd like. I use the jump spell because these jumps could be difficult. Plus, I find that once I use the jump spell, I find it's easier to kill the flying Moas. There's another Lizalfos here at the end. Defeat it just like before. Jump across, and let's keep going in the Valley of Death. Another scene. All the scenes are pretty much identical. These are the easier scenes basically because they're the little enemies in the overworld. So the harder ones, they gang up on you here, especially because these Moas move so quickly, and because there's the lava pits. It's a difficult area, especially if this is your first time through it. You'll probably have some trouble. There's a secret area here that has a point bag. It gives you 500 experience points. I don't really need the experience points at this point, but it's still good to get, or at least to show you guys. If you do happen to reach the 9,000 experience point mark, all it really does, it'll give you a free guy, a new man, a new Link doll, pretty much. So this scene here is more of the same. And like I said, you could use the spell, and this will get rid of these MOAs. That's a good option actually. Or like I just used the jump spell and use the upward and downward thrust to get rid of them. Continue along, and like this whole area is identical to the one we were just at. So defeat the enemies and continue along to the west. We want to head north into the cave, and there's a few more of these MOAs and Gyrobokus here. You can defeat them, run across, do whatever you need to do. I personally, if you're already fully upgraded in terms of your experience points, there really is not much of a reason to try to kill all of these things. So, I suppose you could kill the MOA like I did, because they're just a hassle if you don't kill them. But in this next scene, there's another one of these Arurodas, or scorpions. I just ditched right by him. Like I said, there's no reason to kill him. And there's another new enemy here in the form of a blue Lizalfos. And this is one of the toughest overworld enemies in the entire game. It's basically identical to the red Lizalfos, where it has its own, like, almost like a mace. But this time it actually tosses it. So if you don't need to kill them, just avoid them at all costs, because they're rather difficult. There's one more last scene here, and this one is similar to the ones we were at before, except instead of a orange Lizalfos there is a red Lizalfos. There's still the same MOAs around here, and they're floating around here. What's good about this, though, is we're right near the entrance to the Great Palace. It's not too far from here. And once you reach the Great Palace, even if you die and get game over within the Great Palace, you don't have to return to the beginning, to the North Castle, all the way at the beginning of the game. Instead, you just start fresh at the Great Palace. So we're right at the Great Palace. Just head through this last cave. It has a blue, there's a blue Lizalfos, and I don't know why I'm trying to defeat him. I suppose I hit him once, so I just feel obligated to kill him. And just make your way through the cave, and once you exit the cave, we can enter the Great Palace. And join me for the next part, and we'll tackle the Great Palace.